Tales of the Free Cities, Season 2, The Free Cities Draft. Episode 11, Foreshadowing. A soft wind swept gently through the park, tickling the trees and making the lanterns hanging from their branches sway back and forth. It wasn't a cold evening, but the man habitually pulled his collar closer on instinct alone, a gesture earned from long weeks with only the road for company. Unlike the other rookies, Gaffer hadn't been met by an official from his new patrons after the draft. The only thing awaiting him was a single missive, the script almost painfully cursive and archaic. The language had been so convoluted, it had taken him days to decipher, and even now he wasn't sure if he'd read it correctly. For all Gaffer knew, he was entirely lost, blundering through Gasildra like a bloody fool. Not for the first time, his mind ran through where it had all gone wrong. Over the preceding weeks he'd watched with fascination as the scouts wrangled for influence and pecking order among themselves. Their actions and infighting echoed that of the guilds they represented, bickering like birds over crumbs. He almost suspected position in the draft was a matter of principle for most, the importance of the player secondary. Even so, he'd been so sure of a place with the Blacksmiths' Guild. Their envoys had seemed delighted with him, the contract all but signed. Being told the Mortician's Guild had drafted him instead was reality, slapping him across the face, sharp and hard. He had no idea why they'd chosen him. He hoped it wasn't just to spite their rivals. The memory left him sighing and staring into the trees. At least some of the rookies had gone to the teams they wanted. He'd been as proud as could be that Amber had been the first pick of the draft. She deserved it. As hard a worker as any of them, and with a sensible head on her shoulders to match. Champ and Edge both had more talent, but their attitudes stank to high heaven. The scouts weren't stupid. They'd seen through the raw skill and looked at the stability of the player as much as anything. Players with egos or quick tempers didn't mix well with their teammates, especially not established big leaguers. Thinking back to the time he'd waited for her at the gates, he couldn't help but smile. She'd seemed so alone, heartbroken, and completely at odds with the world, her head down and shoulders narrow. "We sorted you out just fine in the end, kid." The wind picked up and sent the lantern overhead swinging wildly, mottled bursts of light painting the bark and leaves like a flickering fire. It felt ominous as much as anything, a foreboding sign of uncertain times ahead. A figure appeared on the path ahead, shuffling out of the gloom.
"Who goes there?"
An elderly voice echoed across the park, aged and weary, cracking under the weight of long years past. "Ho, friend!" Gaffer held his hands aloft. "I mean no harm. I might be lost." He offered his best smile to go with the words, hoping it would be disarming.
"Less of that soft soap. You're no friend of mine."
The owner of the voice was an elderly man who looked like he'd been pulled through a hedge backwards, his clothes spotted with a motley collection of grimy patches. As he approached, the stench of rotten vegetables and soured wine assaulted Gaffer's nostrils. The roomy film over the man's eyes couldn't hide the demented anger as he waved a walking stick in Gaffer's direction.
"Bug off! This is my path. There's only room for me here, and certainly not for the likes of a ghoul like you."
Gaffer sighed. Clearly the man had lost his mind. It was a sad sight. "I'm just looking for the Mortician's Guild. If you can tell me where they are, I'll be on my way."
"The spooks? Pah! A pox on their bloody house, I tell you. Interfering with the dead? That's no business of the living. You mark my words. No good will ever come of it."
Gaffer had heard enough. Making his excuses, he pushed past the elderly vagrant. He saw the old man waving a white-knuckled fist from the corner of his eye.
"Curses on both of you."
"Both of you?" Gaffer shook his head. Poor old bastard was seeing double, likely addled from whatever spirits he downed over the course of the evening. It was likely best if he slept it off. As the rookie walked away, He unconsciously pulled his collar close again, against a sudden chill. Behind him, around him, within him, a spirit whispered and bared yellowed needle teeth as it chuckled into the night. Ghast was far from done with the Mortician's Guild. The Free Cities draft was written by Sherwin Matthews and is the sole property of Steamforge Games Limited. It is reproduced here with their kind permission and their continued support.